We've naturally talked a lot about the MBA job market that the class of 2020 have faced, whether from the top US business schools or top business schools in Europe. And I'm delighted that my next guest, Anu Ramanan, she is an HEC Paris graduate that came out of school this year into a tough market. But as Anu was telling me, she had as many as 7 job offers, and it'll be fascinating to find out the thought process that she went through. Anu started her studies, she did a bachelor's in physics, then a master's in physics, and has built a career across data analytics. She was a data analyst and then joined HEC last year. Anu, thank you for being with us. I know that your role now as a manager of strategic projects at Eli Lilly keeps you very, very busy, and we appreciate your time. You graduated at a very interesting time coming out of the HEC program this summer. Tell me a little bit about that sort of process, COVID, how that was starting to affect possible choices, and what you were thinking in terms of your next career steps beyond the MBA.
Yeah, first off, thank you, Matt, for having me on your panel discussion, and I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was a very interesting time to, I think, finish up a long and adventurous MBA journey, considering I think what the world went through, since March. Luckily for me, the way I had strategized my, let's say, the job hunting part of the MBA, so I sort of started that last September and rounded it up by the end of January. So I think I was a little lucky in terms of timing, so to speak. But so COVID really did not affect my career choice, so to speak. So I'm not in healthcare because COVID hit. I mean, that actually happened before. I think the challenges that it presented were more, I think, in terms of logistics. I had up and quit my job along with my husband to do an MBA in HEC Paris, and he also was in the program with me. So this meant that we had completely moved our household completely, along with the 2 cats, onto campus, and we had to actually somehow find our way out of campus back here to Frankfurt, which is where I wanted to be. To be an absolute challenge. But I mean, we've all had our fair share of challenges, I think, during these last 6 months. And I'm really glad that the move went well, the logistics of it, really. And yeah, I'm really happy to be settled here and started work virtually as well.
Because, of course, the idea of going back to business school, certainly as a couple, and the investment in time and, of course, in tuition for both of you as a consequence, and you start to think about the role that an MBA will play in the next steps of both your personal and professional development. Now, healthcare, of course, even pre-COVID, is one of the areas where many business schools feel that there's tremendous impact that they can have in that space. It wasn't necessarily on your radar, or at least the sort of role. You've actually, in this sort of strategy role that you've had, you've bypassed the McKinseys, Bains and BCGs and perhaps gone straight into playing that sort of corporate strategy role that you might have expected 3, 4, 5 years later.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the way, so when I think of healthcare, and specifically, I think the role that I have, the strategic project manager's role within Eli Lilly, it really fit the bill in 2 ways, Firstly, I have functional expertise in data science and data analytics, right? So when first healthcare as an industry came into my radar, what actually intrigued me, like what the biggest draw for me towards the industry was really the fact that here is a $1 trillion industry, right? And for an industry and a company that has over 100 years of experience, when you really see how much of an adoption of, say, digital technologies they incorporate, or even how far along they are along the data adoption curve, right? It is actually, they've got a bit of catching up to do, right? And that catch up essentially to me meant the immense potential that I could use where I could sort of use and apply my own expertise, be it digitalization, digitalizing patient journeys, or how doctors interact with the patients or with the pharmaceutical companies, is something that I think data could actually contribute a lot to, with the end effect of actually improving patient lives, and that was a big draw. Secondly, as you mentioned very rightly, was the role. I actually did not even think that I would land a corporate strategy role through the MBA. It's just that I thought that, I needed to have done the consulting bit to eventually get there. But I think the program that I actually got hired into as part of Eli Lilly is the leadership development program. And in the German offices, the leadership program is designed as a strategic role. So it's actually not the same in other offices of Eli Lilly. So it was sort of like a win-win. And this kind of realization also came, it actually came through only through a series of conversations that I had actually with alumni and also with the folks at Lilly, because the role, anything strategy to me sounds vague. What is strategy really? Like the idea of corporate strategy to me was to be able to understand what the C-suite sees, the strategy where they want to go, and translate that into deliverables, like practical deliverables that can be used in a local market. And this was exactly that. So yeah, clear to win on both sides.
Now you said that part of the impact of HEC Paris, in addition to what you learned in the classroom, you had as many as 1,000 conversations as you thought about next career steps. So that both your fellow classmates, but the alumni of the school were a tremendous resource to help you make sure that you made the right next step.
Absolutely. I'd say that goes in three parts, right? Like, I think firstly, one of the biggest resources that I sort of leaned in on was my career counselor. So the second that I had a choice, and a choice that I realized was not straightforward. That is, I was not going to, initially consulting was my straightforward choice. And the second I realized it was not straightforward, I went to my career counselor and she started walking me through the process of how you would think through a decision like that. But it's the nature of the MBA, it requires you to kind of take this top level view, zoom out, right? And then quickly zoom in when you need to, and, be very, put your blinders on, have your goal in sight, and then just go at it, but then this idea of zooming in and zooming out, it doesn't come so easily. And it really helps to have people around you to walk you through it. And my career counselor largely fit that bill. Secondly were alumni who, specifically the alumni that I reached out to were folks who would actually were 4 or 5 years into their career after their MBA. And I just wanted to check with them, first of all, is my hypothesis right that, to assume that a corporate strategy role, in fact, is what you land after a couple of years? And they did actually attest to it and said, in certain cases, yeah, you could get it earlier, like as soon as, right after an MBA. But that did also require a candidate to have previous consulting experience, actually even before the MBA. So that was like point and confirmation. And thirdly, yes, I think, and I think some of the classmates that I actually spoke to, as in like the third bucket, were people who, there is, I think, the rational choice, right? That I think a career counselor and the alums kind of help you see. And I think there is an emotional choice. Sometimes, you need the emotional support of your friends to kind of see you through a choice like that. That could even be things like, I've been super passionate, not just during the MBA, but how I think, women in careers as the topic is very dear to me. And I'm very aware of the fact that how I, as a woman, have actually, fallen victim to, self-selection. It's very easy for me sometimes to say, oh, you know what, but that I think wouldn't work. And I think it helps to have a good support system around you to say, hey, but is that right? No, somebody to kind of check that line of thought and kind of veer you sort of back onto the right track.
Why Europe, and why specifically HEC?
So before I answer why HEC, I think the idea of what I expected out of an MBA is probably context enough to kind of see how HEC sort of fit that bill, right? For me, when I decided to do an MBA, there were two big, let's call it buckets that I needed to be checked. The first bucket were certain professional expectations that I thought the MBA sort of would help pave, right? It was super important to me that I round out my very technical profile with actual formal business concepts. And this meant, so you're talking to a person who's never been exposed to finance before, like at least theoretically, right? Like academically, sorry, or accounting for that matter. So it had to have a academic curriculum that was basic enough that I could follow, but still give me a comprehensive overview of, let's say, if I were to pick apart a business, I need to be able to know the terminologies to be able to do that. Did that have it? Yes, HEC absolutely had it, and on point, and even better, in fact. Secondly, in terms of professional expectations, I had a very clear short-term goal and a long-term goal. After the MBA, I wanted to transition into strategy consulting, specifically an MBB, right? And in the long run, I wanted to get into corporate strategy. HEC was a school that when I spoke to, then students and then alums, the impression that I got was a generalist school. You could want to be a consultant and get into HEC, right? And I had enough alums to back that up, or finance for that matter, or industry roles for that matter, and equally from telecom, from healthcare. And that perfectly fit the bill. And thirdly, to be able to transition into the corporate strategy role later, I needed a quality alumni network that I could depend on to make the transition. So the MBA journey didn't really end for me in my head after the MBA, but I wanted to be able to kind of use it after. And I think, so I had applied to 5 schools, and HEC stood out. So 3 schools in Germany and 2 schools in France. And it was the quality of conversations that I had with alumni. They always took the time. They were structured. They were, they always asked these insightful questions that after the call I would be thinking, okay, but then I have a little thinking to do before I can come to a decision. Those conversations normally, I find, are less subjective and more objective, and kind of drive you to a certain path. And on the personal front, I mean, I was going to do an MBA with my husband. We debated a lot. We decided, okay, initially we said we're going to alternate, right? And then we said, no, we're not going to alternate. There is no need to say, okay, you need to go first and then I later. Then we're going to do this together, and it is possible. And then the duration of the course suddenly became important, because an MBA, I mean, then there's no two ways about it, right? Like, it's a high pressure environment and it's very demanding, and both of us are going to be in it, right? Like, each striving for, I don't know, for our goals. And the other program that was a close contender for us was a year-long program, and that was not going to work out. And HEC was a clear winner there, where it was slightly longer. We were able to manage our personal, gives you some time to catch up on your personal life and not have to compromise professional personal on the other front.
You spoke to the course length. HEC Paris sits with a 16-month program, beyond the typical 1 year of many of the top European programs, and then the 2-year format. Nevertheless, I'm sure it still goes by in a flash. As you look back, highlights for you, what would they be?
I think now that I look back, there are two things that really stand out. And I do come from academia in some sense, and I love academia, so I'm going to give you an academic highlight first. So I took a strategy specialization, and I thought, I really kid you not, right? Like, it was one of the best courses I've ever sat in on. So there is a combination, again, right? Like, when you think strategy, you think it's full of frameworks, things that people talk about, but hardly people do, right? But the culmination of this specialization was one that had courses on behavioral psychology, something that is one of my absolute favorite topics, practical courses on how you negotiate. And then the way this course was set up was through a semester-long, really practical exercises, which made it so unique that I actually walked out of it having learned something new. In a conversation, I'm able to sense needs and wants and a lot better. Conversation itself is a negotiation in some sort, and it becomes more nuanced. And things on game theory, how can you take and having been a physicist, right? Like, I am exposed to the technicalities of how game theory works, and I had always thought it was this concept that worked only in math. And here was a professor who was able to actually, draw a parallel to how that would work in how to big Fortune 500 companies competed, and actually find a competitive advantage out of it. I mean, those are really cool concepts, and not just things you sort of you sort of read and kind of forget about, but it kind of structures your thinking in a way that you approach things differently, you question things differently in real life, I mean, and it's actually practical. And that aspect was, I think, the biggest winner for me. Right, and I think, strategy specialization, hands down, one of the best academic highlights. And I think on the extracurricular front, MBAT for me, so HEC has this, what is called as the Olympics of the MBA. So exactly. It's a sports tournament where over 1,500 students come from over a dozen schools in Europe to compete in, I think, over 20 sports. And the coolest thing about this was that, you couldn't think about the MBA as, you're just crammed for time. You're running pillar to post, trying to finish assignments, do your networking and, apply for that internship. And suddenly here is an event where completely student run with a 600, was it like €500,000 budget, right? Bringing is an event of such a large scale that kind of breaks that tempo of the pace of the MBA. It was a fantastic experience where you can also sort of apply a lot of concepts you have learned in real time there. So, a few colleagues and I had volunteered to actually set up a snack shop, and we experimented with retail concepts and use behavioral psychology to know where you place things. And it might seem silly now, but it actually works. And I think that's the idea of an MBA, right? Like, I mean, it's not just theory. You can actually do those things, and realizing that those opportunities are there all around you, right down to how you interact with your cashier, at a grocery store, or your butchers, and that sort of linking, and especially on such a large scale, was a fantastic highlight, something I would never forget.
Right, and being able to apply that, what your the former dean of the MBA program, Bernard Garrett, used to talk about, exploration, just giving free rein. You've learned something, how do we test it, how do we try it? Now, of course, with your husband, you both successfully applied to one of Europe's most selective programs. Did you share the fact that you were applying together? And what would be your advice to anybody applying to HEC Paris?
Yes, I mean, two questions there, right? Like, I mean, firstly, yes, we had told HEC that we would be applying as a couple, and it is important for us to have that experience in the MBA as a couple. And I was so pleasantly surprised. Apparently, this is so every batch in HEC, the HEC MBA, has a couple. So they put us in touch with a couple that were doing the MBA then, when we were applying, and we sat down and had a really long chat with them. I mean, in terms of how they managed professionally. And I think what is normally on top of, at least was on top of our minds then, how is it that we were going to, get this elusive work-life balance, right? Like during the MBA, and still have a fulfilling, MBA life and a fulfilling professional life. And it is possible. I cannot believe I thought that, it was an either or. It isn't at all. As to the advice that I would actually give to an incoming MBA student would be really, is to plan some more. I think this, the idea of strategizing and planning how you want to use your MBA, defining your short-term goals and your long-term goals, absolutely does not mean that it's actually going to go according to a plan. But I just really believe now, and with the experience of hindsight, I would say that just the exercise of planning different scenarios sort of contributes to kind of honing your gut instinct, and that is exactly the nature of the MBA. You are asked to make these quick calls of industries, of functions, in such a demanding environment that you normally do not have the time to zone out, sit with your paper and sort of analyze and come to a conclusion. And I think that bit of planning really helps in making these quick decisions somehow, and to be able to kind of zoom in and zoom out when you need and when you should.
So Anna, thank you for providing that voice, for providing those insights to our audience at the CentreCourt MBA Festival. Good luck with the career that you're building at Eli Lilly in the months and years to come. And I think you'll have inspired many others, both individuals and couples, with their own business school plans. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.